So, imagine a closed ecosystem, a perfectly engineered transaction, $15.7 billion, 88 fifth-generation stealth fighters. The client is locked, the capital is allocated, the supply chains span across borders, deeply synchronized. Canadian factories are already building the components. The assembly lines are waiting for the final integration. It is the largest sovereign defense procurement in Canadian history, a guaranteed 40-year revenue stream for the American industrial base. Decades of maintenance contracts, decades of software upgrades, decades of structural dependency. It is not just a sale, it is a generational monopoly. The paperwork is ready, the alliance is secure. All Washington had to do was remain stable. All they had to do was respect the parameters of the agreement. They failed the baseline test. In a matter of days, the entire procurement architecture collapsed. $15.7 billion vaporized. The monopoly broken. The aircraft rejected. Not lost to a competitor. Not outbid by a rival. Dismantled by its own architect, erased by the unpredictable regulatory leverage of the very government selling it. Hit subscribe. Because what happened next is the exact moment the American defense establishment realized a brutal truth. You cannot sell a strategic asset when your own behavior is the primary threat. Washington operates on an assumption, the illusion of the technological imperative. They build the ultimate machine. They assume the machine dictates the politics. They assume a fifth-generation stealth fighter is an offer an allied nation cannot refuse. They confused a defense product with a compliance mechanism. This is a fundamental knowledge failure. Look at the physical architecture of the F-35. It is not just an airframe. It is a flying data vacuum, a server rack with wings, a node in a closed proprietary network. The software requires continuous digital authentication. The maintenance requires external diagnostic approvals. The operational capability requires unbroken data links flowing directly back to the manufacturer. This is the dependency trap. You do not purchase this aircraft, you subscribe to it, you lease the capability, and the controlling government holds the master encryption keys. Washington thought this structural dependency was their ultimate advantage, a permanent tether to their industrial base. But a tether only functions if the anchor is stable, and the anchor became entirely erratic. Look at the geopolitical data points leading up to the procurement collapse. The administrative coercion of steel, the unpredictable executive leveraging of aluminum, the strategic confrontation over agricultural tariffs. Washington began treating routine cross-border commerce as a punitive instrument. They applied volatile regulatory pressure to the baseline economy. A sovereign auditor does not ignore these data points. A pattern emerges. The math is simple and devastating. If a partner government will utilize unpredictable executive leverage on commercial aluminum, what will they do with the software authentication for your primary air defense network? If bilateral trade is subjected to administrative coercion on a Tuesday, operational sovereignty is compromised on a Wednesday. Washington thought they were selling air superiority. Ottawa realized they were purchasing systemic vulnerability, the ultimate blind spot of a superpower. They forgot that when you demand absolute reliance, you must provide absolute stability. Enter Ottawa. No outrage, no midnight social media broadcasts, no political theater, just the terrifying, clinical silence of an institutional audit. Washington expected a negotiation, a diplomatic scramble, a plea for an exemption. Ottawa did not negotiate. Ottawa calculated. They initiated a formal strategic defense procurement review, not a political maneuver, a mathematical risk assessment, conducted by military professionals, analyzed by intelligence directorates, reviewed by sovereignty experts. They looked at the proprietary ecosystem, and they looked at the historical data points. There was one glaring, undeniable precedent, a case study in systemic revocation, the Turkish precedent, a NATO ally, a joint program partner, massive financial commitments actively deployed, industrial components actively manufactured. Then, an independent defense procurement decision triggered an administrative response from Washington. The result was absolute. The aircraft were withheld. The financial investment was absorbed. The industrial participation was terminated. Ottawa analyzed this, not as an anomaly, not as a unique geopolitical friction point, but as a documented feature of the system. The control mechanisms embedded in the F-35 architecture are not theoretical. They are fully operational. They have been deployed. The United States demonstrated the precise capacity to revoke an allied nation's primary defensive platform for geopolitical non-compliance. This is the ultimate operational override, an irreconcilable sovereignty vulnerability. If a massive financial investment provides zero protection against sudden administrative revocation, the asset is a liability. The assessment was clinical. The conclusion was unanimous. Purchasing a closed network system subject to demonstrated revocation risk from a volatile partner is not defense. It is capitulation. The math proved the vulnerability. The vulnerability dictated the pivot. The realization hit the defense contractors before it hit the politicians. An administrative scramble, a sudden cold recalculation of projected earnings, $15.7 billion was erased. That was the immediate damage. That was the localized impact. But here is what the headlines completely missed. The localized impact was a fraction of the total cost. The actual cost was the strategic cascade. Within days of the formal Canadian pivot, the intelligence shifted. 4 NATO nations requested copies of the sovereign audit. 4 allied governments quietly asked for the exact mathematical framework Ottawa used to calculate American unreliability. Now, this is the part Washington didn't plan for. The review was no longer an internal Canadian document. It was a blueprint for operational independence. It was a template for systemic decoupling. Every allied air force watched. Every defense ministry took notes. Every nation currently integrated into the proprietary ecosystem asked the identical question: does this structural vulnerability apply to us? The answer, documented by the closest ally the United States has ever had, was an unequivocal yes. The monopoly was abruptly exposed. The ultimate technological asset was branded with a geopolitical warning label. Washington thought they were demonstrating leverage. They were actually advertising their own volatility. They proved that integrating into their defense architecture guarantees sovereign subordination. And the global market absorbed the data instantly. And then came the ultimate irony, the self-inflicted strategic vulnerability. Washington attempted to enforce absolute compliance. Instead, they subsidized a renaissance for their direct competitors. Canada did not cancel the procurement to leave the sky empty. The physical reality of the Arctic still requires sovereign patrol. The aging airframes still require replacement. The capital is still allocated. It is simply flowing across the Atlantic. 3 platforms were immediately invited to an emergency competition: the Saab Gripen, the Dassault Rafale, the Eurofighter Typhoon. Read the evaluation framework. It is a direct point-by-point repudiation of the American proprietary model. Open architecture software, independent national maintenance capability, full operational data sovereignty, not a negotiation, not a compromise, a baseline requirement. Each criterion is a direct response to a specific systemic vulnerability. Each requirement is a calculated defense against administrative coercion. Washington politicized their closed ecosystem. The effect was to make independent defense architecture the most valuable commodity on the global market. They drove a G7 economy to actively fund the European aerospace industry. They handed a $15.7 billion capitalization event directly to Saab, Dassault, and the Eurofighter consortium. This is not a procurement shift. This is systemic capital flight. The administrative pressure was designed to lock the customer in. The execution entirely financed the alternative. Let us look at this through the lens of pure capital. Enter the philosophy of Warren Buffett, the ultimate auditor of value. He understands the economics of a lost client. The most expensive customer to lose is the one you already have, the one who has been in your ecosystem for 20 years. No marketing cost, no acquisition cost, no negotiation phase. The budget was allocated. The supply chain was integrated. The decision was final. All the supplier had to do was maintain stability. All they had to do was not alienate the buyer. They failed. In any industry, the greatest risk is not a superior competitor. The greatest risk is a volatile supplier. When a supplier applies unpredictable leverage to the relationship, the product's quality becomes irrelevant. It is a fundamental law of switching costs. Washington assumed the switching costs were too high for Ottawa to walk away. They assumed the technological gap was too wide. They were wrong. The F-35 is a technological marvel, but technological supremacy without operational control is a liability. A sovereign nation will accept a slightly less advanced airframe. They will accept a marginal decrease in stealth capability. They will accept a different radar architecture. Why? To acquire the most valuable asset in geopolitics: absolute control. When a vendor operates with aggressive unpredictability, the customer stops evaluating the product. The customer evaluates the exit strategy. Washington forgot they were dealing with a sovereign state. They assumed they held a permanent monopoly on Allied defense. They were actually demanding geopolitical submission. Washington just shorted their own credibility, and the market always calls the margin. Back in Ottawa, a military tarmac, an aging CF-18 Hornet sits in the background. Mark Carney steps to the podium. No theatrical grief, no political grandstanding, no emotional speeches. He holds a logistical dossier, the sovereign audit. He does not lament a broken alliance. He simply outlines the new operational baseline. He states the math. The risk was quantified. The liability was unacceptable. The pivot was executed. The era of unconditional integration is over. The assumption of automatic dependency is finished. Washington assumed the hardware would dictate the geopolitical terms. Ottawa proved the geopolitical terms dictate the hardware. You can manufacture the most advanced stealth platform in human history. You can dominate the global aerospace supply chain. You can engineer the ultimate data network. But if the administrative leverage is unpredictable, the platform is worthless. Washington tried to lease an air force, but you cannot lease sovereignty. We will not integrate a strategic system from a government we cannot audit. The following broadcast is a strategic projection and analytical commentary based on current economic and geopolitical infrastructure dynamics. It does not depict real-time events and is intended strictly for educational and investment analysis purposes.